Good afternoon to all of our listeners today. My name is John Glier, and I'm the Chief Executive of Grenzebach Glier, and I am especially delighted today to welcome our very distinguished guest, Anthony Freud, the General Director of the Lyric Opera of Chicago. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone.
Before I introduce Anthony properly, let me remind our guests from around the country and around the world who are listening from so many different arts organizations and other nonprofits of many different kinds. There's several issues. First, we are live online, but alas, we cannot take your questions live. However, Anthony has graciously agreed to take all of your questions, address them, and we will post them on our website along with a recording of this interview in the next several days. Second, we are eager to let all of you know, especially our many lyric patrons here in Chicago and opera lovers everywhere, that this company still relies upon private gift support to support and deliver its extraordinary artistic excellence. With this COVID pandemic that has in fact enveloped us all, it is even more important that the opera stay focused on that important issue. So I'll begin by asking all of you and Anthony to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID, but I wanted to extend this particular invitation to all of you. Those who wish to support the remarkable Lyric Opera of Chicago can contribute to their Heroes Fund. The Heroes Fund was created in response to the devastating financial loss that the Lyric incurred due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This fund matches generous contributions by the Lyric's loyal patrons dollar for dollar, and you can find this link on today's program slide as well as on the GG&A website. It is a link directly to the Lyric's giving page, and we, of course, welcome the support of any and all of you to such a fine company. Now, just a few words about our special guest. Anthony Freud became the General Director of Lyric Opera of Chicago in October of 2011. In addition to directing the company's artistic and business operations, he has led an in-depth strategic and business remodeling process with the board of directors, conceived of and developed the Lyric Unlimited initiative, about which we will ask him, and is forging important new relationships with a variety of other cultural and community organizations. Anthony is recognized internationally for his achievements as General Director of the Lyric Opera of Chicago and previously of both Houston Grand Opera and Welsh National Opera. In 2006, Anthony was made an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, by Queen Elizabeth II in recognition of his services to music. He's the only person ever to have served as chair of both Opera America and Opera Europa, and currently serves as a member of Opera America's board of directors. Anthony has served on juries of numerous international singing competitions. He was an executive producer for Philips Classics, where he managed recording projects for some of the world's leading classical artists. He was director of opera planning for Welsh National Opera and was previously company secretary. He began his professional life at London's famous Sadler Wells Theatre, where his duties included those of theater manager and company manager. More importantly, Anthony attended his first opera performance at age 4, became a regular opera goer in his teens, and has said that by the time he was 14, he knew he wanted to run an opera company. He graduated with honors with a law degree from the University of London's King's College in 1978 and qualified as an attorney in 79, but chose instead to follow his passion for opera. Lucky for us. So let me begin, Anthony, by actually asking you to tell our audience a little bit about what's behind you and the background you're sitting in front.
Yeah, today is a sad day because this week was going to be the third and final cycle of Wagner's Ring that Lyric Opera of Chicago was scheduled to perform and that had been in the planning for a full decade. And the creature behind me is Fafner the Dragon, and the Wagnerians among our listeners and viewers will know that Fafner comes into the third of the four music dramas that make up Wagner's Ring, Siegfried. And today was going to be the last performance of Siegfried in the last Ring cycle. So I thought it was fitting that we should all be encouraged by the glaring eyes of Fafner the Dragon behind me.
So Anthony, let's move into the challenges that we've been all living with for the last 7 weeks. How has this unprecedented health and economic crisis impacted the Chicago Lyric? You were still in the midst of the season, and we were all anticipating the long-awaited Ring cycle. Tell us what has happened and how the Lyric and its company has responded and reacted and pivoted.
Let me start just by acknowledging that Lyric is a tiny speck in a national and global tragedy and catastrophe that this coronavirus crisis represents. And I think it's important that those of us who are entirely focused on our own organizations never actually allow us to forget that we are in the midst of something much bigger than ourselves. But as your question implies, John, Lyric has been dramatically affected by this crisis. I mentioned earlier that we were about to mount a new production of Wagner's Ring. For those who are not opera fans, The Ring is the biggest undertaking any opera company can produce. And as I said, it was literally a decade in the planning. And on March 13th, it seems like a lifetime ago rather than less than 2 months ago, we realized we had no option but to cancel all 3 cycles of The Ring. It was heartbreaking and financially devastating. It's a day I'll never forget. I gathered the Ring company together on the stage, and we were talking about hundreds of people, from singers and orchestral musicians, members of the chorus, members of the stage crew, members of the production team, and the variety of backstage departments, and said that we really had got to the point of having no option but to cancel The Ring. As in all things, our first priority is the health and well-being of our staff, our artists, and our audiences. And it was clear at that point, as a result of the governor's and mayor's announcement the day before, that we could proceed no longer with The Ring. We estimated on that day that the worst case financial scenario stemming from the cancellation of The Ring and the loss of the rest of the season was a possible $27.5 million. We've since managed to reduce that worst case scenario to a loss of something like $14 million. Still an enormous, devastating amount of money that we have to contend with.
So let's explore for a minute, if we can, this financial impact near term. To what extent does it extend beyond the next several months? And talk for a minute, Anthony, about the extraordinary philanthropic commitments that were made to support productions that you obviously have had to cancel for The Ring and for the planned musical 42nd Street.
Yes, the $14 million that I mentioned is the direct loss on this fiscal year of the cancellation of The Ring, the postponement of our musical 42nd Street, of our chamber opera Blue, and of all other activities this season. We have lost everything that we were planning to do this season. And immediately after cancelling The Ring, we entered into some very collaborative discussions with our union partners, and came to, I think, a very equitable agreement with them to ensure that everyone involved in The Ring received something. And I really want to pay tribute to that collaborative process. Without our unions working with us so closely, it would have been impossible to arrive at that equitable solution. And that, I must say, began to reduce the impact of the worst case scenario. But as you said, John, it has been incredibly inspiring and energizing for all my lyric colleagues and me to just feel and experience the support and generosity of so many of our stakeholders and board members. Sylvia Neal, our board chair-elect, and her husband, Dan Fischel, became production sponsors of The Ring right after we cancelled it, and led the charge that resulted in what we're calling the Heroes Fund. We approached our production sponsors of both The Ring and 42nd Street, and without exception, those production sponsors allowed us to retain their sponsorship to help deal with this emergency situation. But it didn't end there. That Heroes Fund also allowed us to match the generosity of, for example, ticket holders who chose to donate back to the company the value of their tickets rather than ask for refunds. And that generosity has totaled roughly $1 million. The Heroes Fund itself is now $8.5 million. And as you'll begin to see, that is how we have been able to reduce the worst case scenario. Alongside, I have to say, some very painful staff cuts, salary reductions, furloughs, reductions in hours worked. Painful, but sadly necessary in these circumstances. Our goal being, and I've said this to our company, to our union partners, our goal being to find the right balance between protecting our institution and protecting our individuals, always bearing in mind that if we fail to protect our institution, we are also failing our individuals. In terms of the longer term prospects, well, that's a whole subject that we should discuss separately. Up to now, we have been really focusing on the fallout from the cancellations and the postponements. We've been focusing on the impact of our staff cuts. And now that the dust has begun to settle around that, we're beginning to think about the future, thinking about how to plan for the future, always bearing in mind that along with the rest of the world, we are still caught in a vacuum of complete uncertainty. I think one of the hardest aspects of all of this for us as leaders of our organizations to deal with is actually understanding the totality of that uncertainty. We're all programmed to deal with problems and issues as they arise. We are all programmed to try to understand problems, try to focus on potential solutions, and make informed judgments about the best course of action. Currently, I think it's impossible even to develop informed instincts about what will happen next month, let alone in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, or in a year. But what we are doing, and I must say I'm finding it very useful, is embarking on a really disciplined, extensive program of scenario modeling. We're very fortunate.
Let's come on to the future in just a second, and let me ask you, and this point of uncertainty that you find yourself in, and obviously the devastating impact that this has had on the season and financial issues, and the extraordinary generosity of patrons. Is this happening globally, Anthony? Your colleagues in London, in Sydney, in Hong Kong, Berlin, are the operas there seeing the same circumstances as we've seen here in Chicago?
One of the aspects of this crisis that I must say is very positive is the extent to which we are in constant touch with colleagues around the country and around the world. Opera America has been organizing multiple conversations between general directors and other leaders of opera companies. And so we've had opportunities to really understand what challenges other organizations are facing, and how they're dealing with those challenges. Inevitably, every company's situation is different. Even within the US, the differences in scale between the largest opera company, the Metropolitan Opera, San Francisco Opera, the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and the smallest means that we are all having to grapple with issues in different ways. When you look at the European scene, the situation differs dramatically from country to country. Reading about how each country has dealt with coronavirus, a lot has been said about how skillful Germany has been in managing its crisis. What is interesting is that Germany, and I mean the federal government of Germany, announced a few weeks ago that all theatres and concert halls would be closed until the end of August, even though in other ways the lockdown is beginning to be eased. There is no norm. I think we're all sharing a situation of uncertainty, and we're all doing our best to try and learn from experiences elsewhere to guide our own approach. Obviously, those of us based in Chicago are most focused on the announcements and directives of the governor and the mayor, but even those are short-term rather than long-term in terms of their reach.
Yeah. So talk for a moment, Anthony, about you and your team, your colleagues at the Lyric, your fundraising team, your marketing team. How have they transitioned to this new virtual environment? How are you doing?
From an operational point of view, I must say things are working very well. This is now the 8th week of working remotely. We actually made the decision to work remotely a week before the governor's stay-at-home order was issued. We are communicating incredibly well and incredibly regularly at all levels throughout the company. At the same time, it's truly surreal. I think all of us working in opera are in this business partly because we love collaborating. We love working closely with colleagues, with artists, with other companies around the world. And to be relying only on virtual contact is a strain and a frustration that I think we're all longing to come to an end. But from an operational point of view, things are going very efficiently. You asked specifically about our development department. They have been busier than ever, I must say, keeping in constant touch with our board members, our donors, our stakeholders, as have our marketing department, which is creating twice weekly what I would call entertainment emails, offering people extracts from Lyric performances, access to online entertainment elsewhere, family-friendly opportunities to engage with Lyric and with the art form. Essentially, we have to work harder than ever to remain in the hearts and minds of our constituents and of our stakeholders. I can honestly say that I have never been more scheduled or worked harder than in the last 8 weeks. And I have a feeling that applies to everyone in the company, and it applies to colleagues all over the world.
Oh, that's extraordinary to hear, Anthony. And I would, in fact, suggest to all of our listeners that they indeed go to the Lyric website to actually connect with some of that outreach. So let me turn to the future, where you were headed a few minutes ago, and really ask the question, what's possible going forward? What's Lyric's leadership current thinking about the near-term performances in the fall, if indeed that's going to be possible? If not, what then? And then I want to get on to the whole question of live performance and how important that remains to us. But let's talk about the Lyric's near-term challenges in the coming months.
I think the starting point is just to reiterate the totality of the current uncertainty. I think it's a waste of energy to decide whether or not to be optimistic or pessimistic. In my mind, it's clear that we will get through this, that recovery will begin, that a new normal will emerge that is almost certain to be profoundly different from the old normal. But when the recovery will begin, when the new normal will arrive, frankly, at the moment is anyone's guess. But we can't simply be passive in waiting to see what happens. And my colleagues and I at Lyric are being, I think, as proactive as we know how to be in trying to ensure that when that new normal arrives, Lyric is best positioned to rise to its challenges and its opportunities. And in order to do that, as I began to mention earlier, we're embarking on a scenario modeling process, which I must say I'm finding very interesting and very helpful. We're lucky in that one of our board members is Dan Grossman, a senior partner of Boston Consulting Group. And we worked with Boston Consulting Group and Dan entirely on a pro bono basis. I'm very grateful for that. A couple of years ago in developing a new business model. The changing environment is not new. The environment has been changing at an extraordinary pace, economically, socially, culturally, technologically, politically, over a number of years now. What is truly extraordinary and unique, and I think literally unprecedented, is what has been happening over the last 2 months. But what has been happening is not a totally out of the blue change. We have to understand that its intensity is unprecedented, but it simply represents an extraordinary acceleration of a change that has been happening throughout the world, frankly, over a number of years now. And so in embarking on a scenario modeling process with Boston Consulting Group and Dan Grossman and his colleagues, we are trying to, from the outside in, so to speak, create a range of possible scenarios and get under the skin of those scenarios to understand them operationally, socially, culturally, and of course, financially, in the hope that as the mists begin to clear around the current uncertainty and there are hints as to which ways forward seem to be more likely, having modeled those scenarios in detail, hopefully we will be ahead of the curve in being able to position Lyric in order to be able to return strongly and vibrantly and healthily back into action. So far as the coming season is concerned, we are focused on returning to the Opera House in time to open on schedule and as planned in September of this year. Having said that, we are, of course, also exploring a range of scenarios that would be proceeding with the season, but incurring very significant losses in earned and contributed revenue, all the way through to understanding the financial impact of losing half of the season or even losing the whole of the season. I do think this scenario modeling is a very valuable way of spending this extraordinarily unnerving and frustrating period of uncertainty.
So in our last 5 minutes or so, I want to come back to the issue of raising money and then finally return to the hints that you've thrown out about perhaps there are new performance models out there, but let's come on to that. Talk for a minute about the company. Obviously, like all performing arts organizations in this country and globally, they rely on raising money. Are you still raising money, and for what? For what are you seeking philanthropic support in the coming months? And I think, as some listeners know, the Lyric was contemplating moving into its next fundraising campaign. How do these circumstances impact your planning around philanthropy?
We are raising money, and I must say it's been wonderful to feel the generosity and support of our donors and our board members and our stakeholders. We're raising money to minimize the demands we will have to make on our endowment as a way of ensuring that we cover our loss in this fiscal year. Given that we are continuing to assume that next season will proceed as planned, we are raising money for productions, for our community engagement and education activities, and every aspect of our work that will form next season. In terms of the longer term, I think we need to understand that future, understand the nature of an organization able to thrive in that future before really focusing on the larger scale, longer term campaign needs. I think to a certain extent, the hiatus of uncertainty means that the plans we had and the intentions that we had outlined 8 weeks ago, 2-3 months ago, need to be reinvented, need to be rethought. Our vision remains constant. We are absolutely determined to redefine what it means to experience great opera. We want to deliver consistently excellent artistry that is innovative, that is relevant, that engages and energizes both new and existing audiences. We are committed to becoming ever more accessible. We want to be thought-provoking. We want to focus on diversity, inclusivity, access. We are continuing to be committed to the training of our artists of the future through our Ryan Opera Center. All of that remains as important, as vital as ever. And I'm ultimately profoundly optimistic that the arts in general and lyric in particular will be back, will be more indispensable than ever. And so it is really an unwavering focus on that destination that we have to maintain, while at the same time being realistic, and I mean rigorously realistic, about how to deliver that vision and how to remain on a healthy, tenable, viable set of tracks that will take us to that destination. I suppose I would describe my state of mind and the company's state of mind as being a combination of profound realism and profound optimism.
As you think about these circumstances and have that sort of ambition for the Chicago Lyric, how do you place this in the global context once again, Anthony? The world of musical and theatrical performance across the globe. Many of the colleagues you know so well in those major cities, will they pivot in the same way? Do they have the same challenges we have here in Chicago? And as you think about this, and you've been so eloquent about it, what are you certain of going forward, and what are you not so certain of?
I refuse to believe that we have lost social interaction forever. I refuse to believe that what has entranced and engaged and enthused audiences around the world and has made them gather together in crowds to experience art and performing arts in all forms will not return. I think the timing of that return is something that we can't yet predict. My sense is that there will come a time when COVID-19 will be perceived, like the many other life-threatening diseases that are a fact of life, as something that we accept as part of a risk of living life to the full. But there is no doubt in my mind that it will take an extraordinary development in medical understanding and management of COVID-19 for people to allow themselves to regain the confidence that they have lost. So my sense is that technology will play an ever-changing part in the delivery of the performing arts as we move forwards. My belief is that the new normal will be profoundly different from the old normal in a whole range of ways, but I do not believe that we have lost forever people's enthusiasm and passion for theatre, for music, for opera.
So Anthony, I could think of no better way than to conclude this conversation than with that sense of optimism about the future. Thank you so much for doing this. I know our audience is deeply appreciative. Let me remind everyone out there that this interview has been recorded, that Anthony welcomes your questions. Please send them in. He will in fact respond to them all, and we'll post them on this website along with the recording. Thank you, Anthony. Very delighted to have you with us this afternoon. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I really appreciate your invitation, and many thanks to everyone who's been listening and watching.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.